Howdy, howdy, and welcome to another Workshop Wednesday. Today it's all about Beyond the Basics as we talk about using calculated fields in Google Data Studio. So if you are watching this one, you should already have some basic experience with Google Data Studio before we move on. Now, of course, my name is Chris Mercer. I am the co-founder here of measurementmarketing.io, and yes, I go by Mercer. You can see our content. We're featured on platforms like Digital Marketer, Conversion Excel, Social Media Examiner, and of course, all of the different courses that we offer at measurementmarketing.io. Now, a little bit about us. We help marketers, marketing teams, and agencies figure out how to know the numbers and ultimately grow the numbers. And we do that by helping people such as yourself learn how to use these tools. Things like analytics and Tag Manager and Data Studio. These are all free tools that are out there, but there's a lot to them. And so we try to help you use them a little bit easier, right? Get a little bit more results from them. And we do that primarily using this measurement marketing framework. And I'm going to cover this very quickly because it helps put today's training in context. So the first step of the framework, and I'll bring it all up here so you can see it, is planning. And that's figuring out which questions are important to answer, what information will I need to actually get those answers, and ultimately what actions will I take based upon those answers. And when you're building out a Data Studio report, you have to plan first, right? So that's sort of the main stage. Then there's the actual build out where you're collecting all the details using something like maybe Tag Manager or Google Analytics. Then it's reporting, where you actually do build a report in Data Studio. And of course, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So you'll learn a lot of the techniques we'll talk about today with calculated fields you'll be able to use in this reporting stage. And then once you have your benchmarks, you can then forecast your near future. And then once you've got your forecasts, you can actually measure against the actual results to make sure that you're hitting the mark, or at least know where you're not, so you can focus on optimization. Now, with all of these trainings, our main goal for you is just getting one new concept, one new idea. That's all you're trying to do with this particular program, because there's a lot of different things you're going to see here. And I'm going to start with something that I think everybody will want to see, which is conversion rates. So we'll talk about that. But then I'm going to show you some other things as well. So your main idea is not to be an expert at all things calculated fields, but just pick up one new idea, one new way of hearing us about something. Maybe it was something you didn't even know was a thing yet and you're not ready for it, but it's good to know that it's a thing, right? Just pick up one new idea, one new concept. Then you can come back, watch this again, and pick something else up from there. All right, ready to get started? Let's do this. Beyond the Basics, using calculated fields in Google Data Studio. Now, we're going to go ahead and jump right into Google Data Studio and show you how to do this. So I'm going to pull this up here. This is our Data Studio report. And in my Data Studio report, it's really basic things sort of set up. I'm going to figure out stuff around whatever the funnel or customer journey is that I want. Well, what I've got set up here, just to kind of get us started, is I have a couple of scorecards, right? So we just added the chart of scorecard. And in those, I've got one that's pulling from our Google Analytics, the page view count. I've got one that's pulling up the revenue count. And what I'm going to want to show you is how to figure out anything that's a conversion rate, or in this case, a revenue per user would be a good thing, or revenue per page view is what I'll use here. Oh, excuse me for that. That's what I love about doing this live, because you always have the occasional cough and there's no mute button nearby. All right, so page views and revenue. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you a technique that can figure out the revenue per page view, which is not something that Google Analytics normally tracks. They do have revenue per user, but I'm going to do revenue per page view. So it's a completely new thing, right? Does not yet exist in all of our fields that are in this list of our data source with Google. None of that exists. If I type in revenue, I can see revenue per user, but that's not what I want, right? Or revenue per 1,000 sessions. It's not what I want. So I need to have revenue per page view. Let's just hypothetically say this. And this is really just for sake of example, so I can show you how to do this. The same technique that I'm about to show you is also how you would do a conversion rate, okay, between two different steps or stages. I'm just going to divide out one divided by the other. So same thing, if it was just 100 people and then 10 people, you can divide it out and figure out a conversion rate. Or in this case, it's number of page views and revenue. It's the same technique that I'm going to show you here. And the technique is called a calculated field. So we need to create a new field, right, which is that's all these are, different fields. We need to create a new field that is really made up of these other two fields, and that are just calculated, in this case, divided by, right? Same thing we're going to do whether it's conversion or in this case, to figure out revenue per page view. So the first thing that I need to do in order to do this is, and this is because I'm taking two fields and I'm going to calculate the difference between the two, I'm going to select these and I'm going to blend the data first. Okay, now this is, again, a little bit as an advanced thing, right? But this is beyond the basics, so I want to make sure you know how to do this. But when you're in Data Studio, you have the idea of creating a field here. We can create a brand new field in the data source itself. I can create a field here by clicking here in what they call a chart level component of creating the field, right? So I can do that. So it's just a field that's created in the chart itself, or one that's available in the entire data source. But what I want to do is create a brand new field that's like a conversion rate. So I want to start with that because most of the students that we work with, that's what they want to know. It's like, how do I create a data field? So I'm going to do that first. So I'm going to right click on both of those, or control click, I should say, on both of those. So they're both selected. Then I'm going to right click and I'm going to come down to where it says blend data. So what I'm going to do, what this basically does is take these two different scorecards and it combines them into a whole different data source. And if you'll see up here, and I'm going to do this, you get page view, this data source is right here, the GDS data source, revenue, GDS data source. This page view count, though, is coming from a completely different data source. In this case, it's called blended data 1. So, and if you click on this, you can edit, right? So I'm going to click on this little pencil icon and I can edit the data source. And I can see, not only can I change the name, which is useful to do, but I can also see what this data source is made up as. It's just page views and revenue in this case. That's it. Now, this data source just contains these two things, but it is made up of this data source and this data source. That's sort of how things are blended together. So if I wanted to add other things in here, I could, and I could just, I can add them in here and then blend it together. So just a little heads up there. But the more important thing is that you get the data blended in the first place. Now, when I have this, I've got page views and I've got revenue here. What I can do is I can come into this and I see I've got page views and revenue, but I don't have anything that's like revenue by page view. So I'm going to create that. So now, because I'm blended, I'm going to change the scorecard, which currently just shows page views. I can have it just show revenue, right? But what I want is revenue by page view. So I'm going to click into here and I'm going to go to create field. And when I do that, it's going to show, I'm just going to call this revenue per page view. So when I do that, I have this little formula. This is the calculated part of the calculated field. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in, what do? I'm going to do revenue. So we're going to do revenue, which if I just start typing in, you see all this different stuff that pops up. These are also formulas you can do with calculated fields, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But I'm going to keep it really simple here. So first revenue. Then what do I want to do? I want to divide that by page views. So if I start typing that up, you can see page views. So it's revenue divided by page views. And that should give me a dollar amount that's substantially lower than this because this can be divided by that. So if I click on apply now, of course, I'm going to come through here. I'm going to do the actual currency. So I'm going to flip the currency. We're going to do USD for dollars. So we'll put it in there and the rest of this we'll keep there. Let's click on apply. So what should happen is now get a whole different metric, which I do. So now I've got 3,900 page views. I've got a total of $10,000 in revenue, basically divided those out, $2.40 for every single page view that's coming to the site right now. So now I know this metric. This is a made up metric. It's a metric, a field, technically a metric because it's a number, but a field that I have calculated. I've asked Google Data Studio to calculate. It is not in analytics anywhere. It's nothing that I'm measuring anywhere else. It didn't come from a spreadsheet. It came from Google Data Studio, right, to do this. So I'm asking Google Data Studio to calculate this field based on these other two fields. And the same technique that I did here, you would also use for something like a conversion rate to be able to say, oh, I want to see, here's step 1, it showed 100 people. Step 2 showed 10 people. Do this as step 1 divided by step 2. That's how you would do it. And you first have to blend the data, then you do the calculated field. So now you know that. Now you know the conversion rate thing, right? And how to figure out how to divide two things out to figure out that. And again, if it was a conversion rate, the only big difference here, if I come in to edit this, is I would, I'm going to click edit. I would change it to a percentage. Because in this case, it's currency, but if I was doing an actual conversion, I could say, oh, make this a percentage, and it would be the conversion percentage, right? So that's the only other main change you would do. In my case, of course, is a dollar amount, so I'm just going to flip it back to that. Okay, so now that we have that all figured out, what I want to do is talk more about calculated fields and what you can do with calculated fields because they can do a lot more than conversion rates. I think that's the thing that most people, especially from a measurement marketing perspective, you'll come in and want to do with Data Studio because you'll have a funnel step 1 and then you'll have funnel step 2 and you'll have funnel step 3 and you'll want to create a little thing that shows here's what the conversion rate is between those and here's the conversion rate between those and here's the ultimate conversion rate. You need to do it the exact same way that I just did. Blend the data together with all the different steps and then create new fields, calculated fields, right? So that's how you do that. But calculated fields can do a lot more stuff. So let's come in here. I'm just going to bring out a table. We're just going to dump a table in here. I'm going to move some of these out of the way as that builds itself. So we'll kind of pull these up and out of the way since we don't need those anymore. So here's a little table. And in a table, so I have the option. Now I'm connected to my data source, my Google Analytics data source in this case. You see a lot more fields available to me. So in this table, I can, of course, add, let's tell you what, let's just do source. I'm going to pull up source. And we'll just do regular source here like this. So I'm going to do source, medium. And I'm just going to do some things as an example, just kind of show you what's possible with this. Not that you would want to do this, but just to kind of give you an example. So I've got source and medium. Let's say I want to do that first, source, then medium. And then the page views. We'll keep that for now. Okay. So I've got my little table. Now, what will happen is if I click on to any of these dimensions, right? I can click on dimension. I have a create field. I can click on the metric or the add metric, and I have a create field. And I have a create new field here. So the difference between these, if I click this button, it pulls this up, and I can create a new field based on anything that's in here, right? All my available fields. I can say, show me this divided by that, or show me just what this would be if it looks like that. I'll show you a bunch of the different examples here in just a moment. But you can basically create your new field. But whenever I create a new field, it will then be available to the data source, which means it's available to every single chart in the data, in the report itself. So if you click on this, and this is a very subtle difference that I don't think you would know unless it was pointed out to you, right? So that's why I wanted to point it out. If you create a new data field here, it'll then show up in this list. Anything that shows up in this list is available to any chart in the report, right? It's because it's a data source change. It's at the very, very top level. Then you have the ability to do it down here. And this feels like the same thing. You're like, oh, create field, create new field, same difference, right? And in fact, if I create field here, it pops this up. It's a smaller little box, but what it's doing is it's basically telling me that I can create the field based on what's available to the chart. This is chart level calculated fields. So chart level calculated fields. Now here's the kicker. What I just showed you with the blended data thing, you can only do at the chart level. So if I come in here and I want to see let me just type in original UTM source. Let's do that. So I see I can do original UTM source. And then I'm going to say, in fact, let's do this. I have not played with this. So let's figure this out together, shall we? I'm going to do something that kind of puts stuff together. So we're going to do concat. So I'm going to type in this. So this should be what we want. So I'm going to say concat. Okay. So when I do this, this basically just concatenates, pushes things together. It's all this word. So it's concatenation, right? It's kind of a little fancy word to basically say, stick these two things together. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say, and I'm going to follow the examples right down here, which is what I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so you can see it. So right in here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say quotes. We'll say the source. Actually, I need to make that single quotes, I believe. So I'm going to say quotes. Source is, and then I'm going to say X, right, which is the source. So I'm going to type in the source, and I'm going to say this. I'm going to say original source. This is my original UTM source. This is something that we've customized, so we have an original source. So I'm going to say original source, and then I'm going to say comma, which I believe is what that will be here. So original source is, and then the next stage, if I get that right, this is why, again, I love doing this live, so we can figure this out together. So the original source, and then I'm going to put regular source. Oops, get that little thing there. And then comma, let's see, regular source, comma, let's say source, traditional source. So I'm going to do that. Let's see if this works. So what's happening here is this is trying to figure out, right? This is saying, hey, I've got, a little problem with the formula, and it's going to try to help us out. So let's figure this out. So concat browser, I'm going to basically push these two things together. Original source is, I forgot a comma right there. So original source is comma, then original UTM source, comma, and then regular source. I'm going to put a little space in between there because otherwise this will all smash together, I'm sure. And I'm going to put a space between here, make it a little bit easier to read. And a space here. make it easier to read. There we go. And I'm getting that little green check mark. You see, as it's spinning around, it's constantly trying to figure itself out and say, hey, is this going to be something I want? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is the source story. Again, I don't know you'd really want to do this in the real world, but I want to show it that you can. And it says it's text, which it would be, right? This actually would be a text. And this is what's important about calculated fields is they aren't just numbers, even though I have mostly used them for numbers. Let's face it, I've used it for mostly that. But there's a lot of other things you can do. So I wanted to kind of show you a text one, and this is just forces me to be able to practice as well. And this is honestly, this is what I would recommend you do when you're playing around with this stuff is like, okay, I would never do this in the real world, but I want to practice, right? So you figure out something to practice. You make something else up where it's kind of a safe place to do that. So now I'm going to do source story. Here's what I think should happen. This is a very important thing when you're playing around with these tools. What should happen and did it happen? So what should happen is I should have a new field that I can put in this chart that would show original source is this, and then regular source is this, right? And it would be an actual new column that I'm going to put in there that'll show us that, original source and regular source. And again, original source is something we do completely separately with custom dimensions, et cetera. So that's why we have this, and you may not have that in your end, but you know, but use whatever, right? So I've got that. I'm going to click on apply. So now I've just created the field. It should add that in there, and I should see almost a story coming through here for the different traffic sources. So let's take a look and see if we have that. So I'm going to go back into our chart. I'm going to bring this over so we can see, and look at that. So in this case, I have this source of traffic. The original source is Infusionsoft, regular source Infusionsoft. But this one was Infusionsoft. The regular source was direct. This one, the original source is Social Media Examiner, and then Social Media Examiners was Infusionsoft. This is Facebook Direct. So I can start to get an idea of, you know, I've basically created this thing out of nothing with calculated fields, and it's 100% text. It's not numbers at all. So, but it's just in this chart. So now if I come over and I go to add another table, and I'm just going to create a table here, and we'll pop it down here in the bottom so we can bring out some space. If I want to add this field to it, which again was called source story, so I'm going to go to dimensions. I'm on this table. I'm going to click on my dimension. I'm going to say, yeah, I want to add the source story. I can type it in, but it's not going to show up. Why? Because it's only this chart, technically this chart that only has access to that. Here I've got source story, right? So if it listed my dimensions and I type in story, you'll see source story because I created it, but I created it at a chart level. It's not available as a data source level. So this chart doesn't have access to it. I have to recreate it for this chart. So just a little FYI, if this was something that I wanted all my charts to have access to, then I would have to create it down here. Create new field. Again, it would be the exact same thing. I would say, you know, I'm just going to call it my source story to keep it separate here. So my source story, and then I would do the same thing. I would start typing in, okay, first what I want it to do, I'm going to concat, and then I'm going to smash them together. So we're just going to say quotes, this is something, space, comma, and then whatever I want the value to be, right? So let's just say source, and then the next one, quotes. I think you can do double quotes. Let's try it out. So something else. Again, I'm just doing this to practice, and then we're going to do this and call this medium. All right, so now I've got source and medium. So that's what should, oops, that didn't quite work the way I wanted it to. We're going to click where it says medium. There we go. So source medium, we should see a green check mark. Boom, that's telling us it's worked. So then I've got my source story. So I click on save, and we're done on our calculated field. So now if I click on story here, my source story will show up here, but the regular one, again, going back to this chart, here, source story does not show up here because, again, this is only associated to this chart. Only this chart has it. Only this chart is calculating itself. But if you're doing blended data like we did up here, you have to do it at a chart level. This one, you can't do blended data, so it's going to be a little FYI. But then if I wanted to put the story into this chart, I'd have to either recalculate it or I just create it as my source story and put it in there, and then it'll show my story as I have here. So in this case, showing us this is something source, this is something else medium, right? That's all it really does. But you can kind of get an idea of how this works. So there's just a couple of different things around calculated fields. One, that they exist. A lot of people don't know that. Two, how to do the conversion steps, because that's the one that 90% of the people care about. So I wanted to really just tackle that first. The only difference, yes, you use a calculated field for it. But you have to blend the data first. That's the secret sauce. So we're talking a little bit about blended data. There's lots of other stuff you can do with that, a little bit beyond the scope of this training. But just know that when you do your conversion rates, you have to blend the data first. It has to know what you mean by step 1 or step 2, or in this case, page views and revenue, before it can actually blend the data of those. But the other thing you can do with calculated fields is there's a lot of stuff you can do. And I'm going to show you this. And I'm going to give you a link to this for those of you that are Academy members. You'll have a direct link to it. Otherwise, just Google it. But you can see here as I zoom in, this is the function list. And you can just Google this, Data Studio function list. It'll take you right to it. This is everything that you can do with calculated fields. This also changes all the time. In fact, just recently they added new stuff in here. So come back to this thing often, because if you can't do the thing you're trying to do, you might be able to in the very near future. So here you've got number of approximate values, right, for a count. You've got the average of. You've got that's interesting. The approximate number of unique values. I don't know why you would want an approximate as opposed to an actual number, but whatever. You have the ability to do that. Number of distinct, unique values. You've got the max, the medium, the min, the minimum, the percentile, standard deviation, right? For those who really want to geek out. Of course, sum. Think like a spreadsheet. You know, those of you who use a spreadsheet, same thing. Absolute value. But these are just numbers, right? All the arithmetic stuff. Look how much that you got. But if you keep going down, you'll see dates. Returns the difference between two different dates. That's sometimes really useful. What was the date of them becoming a lead divided by the difference between becoming a lead and the date of them becoming a buyer? Date difference will tell you that. So you can calculate that field. And of course, everything else around dates. Then if you come down here to geography, you can start doing a lot of that. And again, we don't really worry that much, but maybe that's something that we would one day want to answer, things around geography, where people are, right? You could do that. Then you've got miscellaneous stuff in terms of text. A lot of this is text. This one I think is really useful. And it's what I like about this sheet and why I want you to explore this sheet. So this is a little concatenation thing that we did with text. But this hyperlink one, this miscellaneous one, hyperlink, when you click on these, learn more. Data Studio has done such a great job on documentation too. I love it. But here, when you click learn more, it'll say, okay, great. Let's talk about hyperlinks. When you scroll down, so this, and I won't go into the details of this, but I want you to be aware that this stuff exists, because it will help you with your reports. So, you got this little data set coming through. Well, look at the stuff you can do with it. I'm going to go down to examples. This is actually an embedded real life Data Studio report, right? You see that when I hover over it, Privacy Data Studio. This is an embedded Data Studio. This is an actual Data Studio report. I can open this report in Data Studio. In fact, let's do that. I'm going to go to this report in Data Studio. And so this is an actual Data Studio report that Google did as an example, but I can click on this. This is a report. That's a table report with header images, right? Of product link, image link, and what these are. And I can click. This one's not hyperlinked. This one is hyperlinked. This is hyperlinked. And they go directly to, in this case, the Google Merchandise Store. How cool is that from an interactive perspective, right? These are things that you probably don't even know you could do with Data Studio. You can do this little hyperlink thing. The hyperlink is a calculated field. That's how they're doing it. So they're saying, oh yeah, grab the name of the product, grab the hyperlink for the product, put those two things together, and then put it in this column. So it's a calculated field, which is really cool. Again, you don't think about calculated fields like that. At least I never did. I thought about them like I just did before, with either, pushing two things together or doing a lot of arithmetic. And mostly I do arithmetic. For me, it's conversion rates or dollars per user, cost per acquisition, stuff like that. But look at all this other stuff that you can do with calculated fields. And that's why they call them calculated fields and not calculated metrics. Like in Google Analytics, you have something called a calculated metric. It's just a number, right? And that's it. And it only does numbers. But with Data Studio, you can do so much more with the information. So if you don't get the information in your data source in the exact way, or if your data source doesn't have the information that it needs, but maybe it's got the pieces and the parts that will allow you to get to the ultimate information. Like in this case, our data sources don't come with conversion rates between steps, but I do know the number of people in step 1, the number of people in step 2, so I can figure it out. So I can tell Data Studio to figure it out with the calculated fields. And that's what I wanted you to know, that exists and how to do that. But also it can do so much more. And I would force yourself to play with this a little bit, just like something like this is kind of interesting. This hyperlink one, this is one that's interesting to me, to be able to see that and be like, hey, what can I do with a report that looks something like this, where it's highly interactive? And I can say, oh yeah, go click on, you want to see the report for this product? Click here. Right? Or for this page, click here. And I mean, there's some really cool stuff that you can do with Data Studio, but it requires the knowledge of calculated fields and for you to practice. So that's the biggest reason that I wanted you to be able to be exposed to this workshop, so that you understood that calculated fields were A, that they were a thing, B, how to very quickly do conversion rates, It does not take a long time at all. You just got to know the trick, right? Which is first select all the stuff you want to be able to figure out the difference between, or in this case, the division between the two things you want to divide, and then blend them, and then you divide them. That's how it works. It's chart level, right? Not from a data source level, but it gives you the answers you need so that you can figure out the reports. And then know that you can create data sources that are chart level or data source level, which is report level, the entire reports are. And there are pros and cons to that. And when you go into the Data Studio reports, the docs on this, you'll see that they kind of cover some of the pros and cons. The biggest pro, though, is using blended data, which is a lot of times with conversion rates, you have to do it chart level, which means you blend, you select what you want to do. And when you're in the chart, you're creating the thing from here, small little windows that you're creating. That's how you know it's chart level. If you're looking at a big window like this, then it's report level, which means, again, sometimes you want to create one thing one time, and that's it. And then Data Studio has access to all the different charts, have access to it in the report. Totally cool, right? The only other difference here is the data source. If I don't have the ability, and again, it's slightly more advanced, but just something to be aware of, in Data Studio, there are different permissions. There's report level permissions, so I can edit the report, stuff like that. And then there are data source level permissions, if I can edit the data source. So if you want to be able to create data source fields at the data source level, you have to have that ability to edit. Otherwise, you won't even see this option. So if you load up a report and you don't even see this down here, it just means that's Data Studios telling you, listen, you don't have permission to change the data source, even something like creating a calculated field. You can't do that. So you have to go back to whoever shared the original data source and make sure that you have an ability to edit that. And at the chart level, it's a little more open. You have to have the ability to edit fields in the data source, but that you don't have to have the ability to edit data source itself. So just a little FYI on that. But with all of these things, especially with calculated fields, you cannot just expect to watch a workshop and be like, cool, now I got it. At best, you at least know they're a thing. You see some examples. You kind of have an idea of some things you can do, and you can create new metrics and new dimensions out of stuff. But that's really it. You got to practice. So take 10 or 15 minutes, practice something simple that you could do is page views by revenue and revenue per session, because you can even do this with Google Analytics sample data. So everybody has access to this. Just practice it so you kind of get an example of how to blend data and how to figure out a division of two different stages or steps, because you can use that technique not only for things like this, but again, for, average order volume and, average value of a customer. I mean, all sorts of stuff you can do that for, and conversion rate steps, right? It's how you figure out conversion rates. So same exact mechanism, you just flip it to a percentage as opposed to a dollar amount. But then also force yourself, maybe if you got an extra 10 or 15 minutes, to play around with concatenation as an example, right? To get an idea of how that works. So some really cool things that you can do here with calculated fields. Just want to make sure that you actually experience them, practice them, because if you don't do that, things just don't really get integrated. You don't really have a skill. You just have information, right? And information is not useful. Skill is useful. In order to get information and turn it into skill, you need practice. So please take a few minutes to practice this and play around with it, because then your data studio reports become that much more useful. And of course, if we can help you along the way, please ask. All right. So with that, hopefully you got at least one new thing. I know for me in the beginning, it was just, I didn't know I could even calculate new things. That's awesome. Then it became, cool, I can do calculated with conversion rates. And that's where I pretty much stopped for a long time, because that was the most useful thing. But then as I investigated calculated fields, especially looking at that function list, I go, wow, what else can I play around here with, right? Like I can do this hyperlink thing. I'm thinking, well, now that I know I can do that, what kind of reports could I create to make them more useful for our clients or stakeholders? So I think that's pretty cool. So at least one new thing. Now, if you are just starting out, even if you're not just starting out, but you want to pick up some skills around measurement and you want to take some very fast focused courses, measure.tips/courses will take you to our list of currently available courses. We do new ones every 4 to 6 weeks. They're hyper focused. They are focused to give you a win, which stands for what I need. They're not going to teach you every possible bell and whistle in Google Data Studio, for example, but man, it'll show you what you need to get running and get working and get something useful. And that's why we call them wins. So little win courses, if you're interested for that, measure.tips/courses. If you are really want to do a deep dive, if maybe you're part of a team and you need multiple logins, you got multiple people that are your company, you want to have this measurement culture within your company, I would recommend the Measurement Marketing Academy you take a look at. It's measure.tips/start. We'll take you there. It includes all of the win courses, but it has multiple logins, so multiple people on your team can have access to stuff. It has all of the different workshops. You've got group coaching that's a part of this program, so you can work with instructors directly to get help with what you need. So there's a lot of stuff back there at Measurement Marketing Academy, measure.tips/start for that. If you are an Academy member, of course, we do ask that you join us for the office hours. If you've got a question, you can chat with instructors live. It's every Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And of course, thank you for being an Academy member, and we look forward to seeing you on the next office hours member Q&A, which is our group coaching. If you need the link, by the way, for an Academy member, check in the Academy itself. And of course, on your email, you get an email every week with that as well. Next week, we've got a strategy session. We're calling this one, the topic is going to be using cost per acquisition to guide your ad spend. So even if you don't know cost per acquisition is actually a win course that we're going to be creating here in just a couple of weeks. We'll be announcing that. But if you don't know if you do know your cost per acquisition, it's like, okay, what do I do with this? Like now that I know it, how do I use it? And we can use it to guide things like ad spend. And we'll show you, we'll talk about how to do that in the next workshop. That'll be next week's workshop. Now, speaking of, we do not make all of these workshops public. Some of them we do, some of them we don't. But if you are a part of Workshop Wednesday, you get access to all of them. So measure.tips/WW. It is currently free to join this. So if you want access to all of these, every week we'll just email you out and say, hey, here's what the topic is. Enjoy. If it doesn't fit for you, that's great. You don't have to use that topic. You don't have to log in and watch it. But chances are there'll be at least one workshop a month that will be interesting to you. And we cover different topics. So one week we'll do the category like we're doing this week, which is Beyond the Basics. Then we do a strategy session. Then we do What's New, and we cover all the different changes and the different tools. And the week after that, we do Getting Started. So it comes back for something for beginners. And then it rotates back to Beyond the Basics for those of you who have got a little bit more experience with a certain tool. And so there's something for everybody pretty much all the time in Workshop Wednesday. Again, it is currently free. The only way to get access to every single workshop each week is measure.tips/WW. So if you want access to that week's workshop, that's how you do it. And I invite you to join that. And with that, we'll go ahead and bring it to a close. You have just watched Beyond the Basics, using calculated fields in Google Data Studio. Thanks again for watching this workshop, and we will see you on the next one. Take care.